I, Julian of the Silverwood Pack, reject you, Quinn. You are an Omega, weak, broken, a stain on my bloodline. Leave this territory by midnight, or my enforcers will hunt you down. The words were as sharp as the ice beneath my boots, but it was the heavy, suffocating silence of the pack that truly killed me. No one argued. No one even looked away. They just stared, their eyes glowing faintly in the twilight, waiting for me to break. "Julian, please," I whispered, the biting mountain wind immediately stealing my breath and scattering it into the dark pines. "A blizzard is coming. The temperatures are dropping below zero. I won't survive the night." He didn't even flinch. He just turned his broad back, his dark coat sweeping against the frost. "Then die in the snow, Omega. Nature is just taking out the trash." The cold did not creep. It conquered. It was an invading army of needles and glass, marching across my skin and sinking deep into my bones. I had been walking for what felt like centuries, though the moon had only climbed halfway up the lay. The Silverwood Pack territory was vast, heavily guarded by ancient pines and jagged, unforgiving ridges. I knew these woods. I had grown up in them, foraging for the elders, tending to the pups, keeping the communal fires burning while the stronger wolves hunted. I was an Omega, the lowest rung of our society, but I had always believed I belonged. I thought my service earned me a place. I was wrong. The moment the mating bond had sparked between me and Julian, the future alpha of Silverwood, my fate was sealed. He could not be seen with a weak, submissive mate. He needed a warrior, an alpha female who could command respect. I was merely an inconvenience, a cruel joke played by the moon goddess. And so, the rejection. The severing of the bond. It had felt like a physical tearing in my chest, a phantom claw ripping out my heart and leaving an agonizing, bleeding void in its wake. The snow was falling heavier now. Thick, wet flakes that clung to my thin jacket. I had not been allowed to pack anything. I was cast out exactly as I stood in the pack square, wearing a faded denim jacket, a simple gray sweater, and boots that were already letting the moisture seep through. "Keep walking," I muttered to myself, the words tumbling out in a white cloud of vapor. Just keep walking. But where was I going? Beyond Silverwood lay the Dead Peaks, a stretch of untamed, brutal wilderness that even the most feral rogues avoided. Legend said it was cursed, haunted by the spirits of ancient wars. Reality said it was simply a frozen wasteland where nothing could survive the winter. My legs grew heavier with every step. The snow was up to my knees now, a dragging weight that demanded more energy than my exhausted body could provide. I could feel the initial stinging pain of the cold beginning to fade, replaced by a terrifying, insidious numbness. My fingers had stopped hurting an hour ago. Now, they were just heavy, useless blocks of ice hanging at the ends of my arms. I stumbled over a hidden root, crashing hard into the snowbank. The impact jarred my teeth, and a whimper escaped my cracked lips. I tried to push myself up, but my arms buckled. The snow against my cheek felt surprisingly soft. Dangerously soft. "Get up, Quinn," my inner wolf whined. She was a small, fragile thing, suppressed by years of submission and now crying out in the face of our imminent demise. "Get up." I managed to roll onto my back, staring up at the canopy of pine needles, groaning under the weight of the snow. The wind howled through the branches, sounding almost like a chorus of mocking voices. Julian's voice. The sneers of the pack elders. Tears welled in my eyes, freezing almost instantly on my lashes. Was this really how it ended? 22 years of keeping my head down, of absorbing the insults and the heavy labor, all for a lonely death in a nameless snowdrift? The injustice of it burned, a tiny, flickering ember of anger deep in my chest. But it wasn't enough to warm my freezing blood. My vision began to narrow, the edges of the world turning a soft, fuzzy gray. The violent shivering that had racked my frame for hours suddenly stopped. A profound, terrifying peace washed over me. The pain was gone. The cold was gone. I felt as though I were floating on a dark, quiet ocean. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the empty forest, my eyelids fluttering shut. I tried. As the darkness rushed in to claim me, the wind carried a sound that made my fading heart give one last weak thump. It wasn't the howl of the wind. It was the sound of crunching snow, heavy, deliberate footsteps. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't move. But through the fading haze of my consciousness, a massive shadow blotted out the meager moonlight. A hot, ragged breath washed over my frozen face, carrying the scent of pine, ozone, and something overwhelmingly powerful. Death has come, I thought peacefully. Then, a massive set of jaws gently, impossibly gently, closed around the collar of my jacket. I was lifted from the snow with terrifying ease, swinging weightlessly in the grip of a monster. As the world finally faded to black. Fire. It was the first sensation that broke through the thick, heavy wall of nothingness. Not the destructive, agonizing fire of the severed mating bond, but a steady, radiating heat that seeped into my skin, chasing away the ice that had settled in my veins. I drew a breath, and my lungs expanded with a sharp, painful crackle. The air smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and a deep earthy musk that made my inner wolf stir with an instinctual primal alertness. Slowly, painfully, I forced my heavy eyelids open. I was not in the snow. I was staring up at a ceiling of massive, dark wooden beams. The warm glow of a colossal stone fireplace painted the room in dancing shades of orange and gold. I was lying on a sprawling leather sofa, buried beneath layers of thick, heavy furs that smelled aggressively of the outdoors. Panic, primal and sharp, finally pierced through my exhaustion. I tried to sit up, but my body rebelled. My muscles screamed in protest, and my head spun dizzily, forcing me to fall back against the plush pillows. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It was deep, rough-hewn, and commanding in a way that made Julian's alpha tone sound like a petulant child's whine. I turned my head, my neck stiff and aching. Sitting in a heavy wingback chair near the fire was a man. He was imposing, even while seated. He was broad-shouldered, clad in a simple black henley that stretched tight across his chest, and dark, worn denim. His legs were stretched out toward the hearth, powerful and relaxed. But it was his face that stole the breath from my lungs. He was strikingly handsome, but not in the polished, pristine way of the high-ranking wolves I knew. His features were sharp, carved by harsh winds and difficult years. A faint, jagged scar cut across his left eyebrow, disappearing into his thick, untamed raven-black hair. His jaw was covered in a rough shadow of stubble, and his eyes, they were the most startling shade of amber, glowing with an intense, piercing intelligence that made me feel entirely exposed. You're not a rogue, I croaked, my voice sounding like crushed gravel. He didn't move, save for a slow blink of those glowing amber eyes. What makes you say that? Rogues don't live in cabins like this, I whispered, taking in the grand, rustic architecture of the room, the walls lined with towering bookshelves, the heavy iron chandeliers. And rogues don't rescue omegas. A dark, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. You're very observant for someone who was legally dead 10 minutes ago. Your core temperature was barely registering. Another hour in that storm, and even a full shift wouldn't have saved you. I flinched at the reminder of the storm, the memories of the rejection rushing back with sickening clarity. I pulled the heavy fur blanket tighter around my chin, suddenly feeling incredibly vulnerable. I was in a strange house, with a strange, incredibly powerful wolf. Who are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Where am I? He finally stood, and the sheer size of him made me press further into the couch. He had to be at least 6'4", a towering wall of muscle and quiet menace. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, crossing the room to a small wooden table. He poured a steaming liquid from an iron kettle into an earthen mug. You're in the deep territory, he said, turning back and walking toward me. Far beyond the borders of whatever pathetic pack cast you out. He knelt beside the couch, holding the mug out to me. Up close, the scent of him was intoxicating pine needles, petrichor, and a raw, thrumming power that made my omega instincts simultaneously want to submit and lean closer. Drink. It's willow bark and honey. It will help with the inflammation. I hesitated, eyeing the mug. Is it poisoned? I asked, a bitter edge to my voice. It would have been easier to just leave me in the snow. His amber eyes flared, a flash of something ancient and dangerous sparking in their depths. If I wanted you dead, little wolf, you would have never woken up. I don't waste my time bringing corpses into my home. I swallowed hard, my throat clicking. Slowly, my trembling hands reached out from beneath the furs and took the mug. Our fingers brushed. His skin was burning hot, a stark contrast to my still freezing hands. A strange electric jolt shot up my arm, making me gasp and almost drop the cup. He pulled his hand back quickly, his jaw tightening. "Drink," he commanded again, softer this time. I brought the mug to my lips. The liquid was hot, bitter, and sweet all at once, sliding down my raw throat and sending a new wave of warmth into my stomach. "My name is Vincent," he said quietly, watching me drink. "Quinn," I replied, my voice small. I was of the Silverwood pack." "I know of Silverwood," Vincent said, his tone darkening. "Run by an arrogant fool named Marcus, who is currently grooming an even bigger fool named Julian." I choked slightly on the tea. "You know them?" "I know of many things in these mountains, Quinn," he said, standing back up and looking down at me. "I know that a pack that throws its weakest to the winter is a pack rotting from the inside out." He turned away, walking back toward the fire. "Rest. You are safe here. No one comes to this mountain. No one survives the climb. But you brought me up here," I pointed out, my fatigue beginning to pull me under again. "In the snow." Vincent paused, looking over his shoulder. In the flickering firelight, his shadow stretched across the wall, twisting and contorting until, for a brief, terrifying second, it didn't look like a man at all. It looked like a wolf, an impossibly massive, obsidian wolf. "I am used to the cold, Quinn," he said softly. "Sleep." And despite the mystery, despite the fear, the absolute authority in his voice commanded my body to obey. My eyes closed, and I fell into a deep, dreamless slumber. The next 3 days were a blur of agonizing recovery and strained silence. The frostbite had been severe. Though I had kept my fingers and toes, the skin was raw, blistering, and painfully tender. Vincent treated my wounds with a stoic, clinical precision. He would apply thick, pungent salves made from crushed herbs and roots, wrapping my hands and feet in clean linen. He rarely spoke during these treatments. The silence between us was heavy, thick with unspoken questions. I watched him constantly, trying to solve the puzzle of the man. He lived alone, that much was clear. The cabin was massive, 3 stories of timber and stone, perched on the edge of a jagged cliff overlooking an endless ocean of pine trees. Yet, despite its size, it felt solitary. There were no photographs, no personal mementos, just books, maps, and weapons. Heavy axes, hunting knives, and a beautifully crafted recurve bow hung on the walls. "You stare too much," Vincent said on the 4th afternoon. I jumped. He was sitting at the heavy oak dining table, field stripping a hunting rifle. He hadn't even looked up, but I knew he could feel my eyes on him from where I sat, curled in the armchair by the fire. "I'm trying to figure you out," I admitted, deciding to be bold. The fear I initially felt had dulled, replaced by an intense, burning curiosity. "There's nothing to figure out." He slammed the bolt back into the rifle with a sharp clack. "I live in the woods. I hunt. I survive. It's a simple existence. It's an isolated one," I countered. "Wolves are pack animals, Vincent. We aren't meant to be alone." He finally looked up, his amber eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity. "Pack!" He spat the word as if it were poison. "Tell me, Quinn, what did your pack do for you? They fed you scraps, treated you like a servant, and when you became inconvenient, they threw you to the wolves literally." I shrank back, the truth of his words stinging like a fresh slap. I looked down at my bandaged hands. I was an Omega. It was my place. Julian was an Alpha. It was unnatural for us to be mated. Mating bonds are forged by the goddess, not by pack politics. Vincent's voice lowered into a dangerous growl. He stood, abandoning the rifle, and paced toward me. The sheer, physical pressure of his aura filled the room, making it hard to breathe. An alpha who rejects his true mate for political convenience is a coward. He is weak. He's the strongest warrior in Silverwood. I fired back defensively, a leftover reflex from years of conditioning. Vincent stopped directly in front of my chair. He leaned down, placing a massive hand on each armrest, trapping me. His face was inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating from him, Smell the intoxicating scent of pine and rain. Strength isn't about how hard you can bite, Quinn, he said, his voice a dark velvet whisper. It's about what you choose to protect. Julian protected his pride. He sacrificed you to keep his image intact. I stared into his glowing eyes, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was right. Every instinct in my body knew he was right. I had spent my life defending a system that had ultimately tried to murder me. Why do you care? I whispered, my voice trembling. Why did you save me? I'm nothing to you. I can't offer you anything. I'm just a broken Omega. Vincent's expression softened, a fleeting look of deep, ancient sorrow passing behind his eyes. He slowly reached out, his rough thumb gently brushing a stray lock of hair away from my cheek. The touch was incredibly tender, sending a shockwave of warmth down my spine. You aren't broken, Quinn, he said softly. You're just scarred. And scars are just proof that you survived the fire. He pulled back, the intense moment breaking as quickly as it had formed. He turned back toward the table. You can walk on your own now. Tomorrow, we go outside. Your muscles are atrophying. You need to move. I watched him return to his rifle, my mind reeling. My inner wolf, who had been a silent, terrified lump since the rejection, suddenly sat up, her tail giving a tentative thump. He is an alpha, she murmured in my mind. Not a panicked observation, but a deep, resonant truth. But not like the others. Okay, I said to his back. Tomorrow, we go outside. The mountain air was a shock to the system. It was crisp, thin, and bitterly cold, but the sun was shining, casting blinding reflections off the untouched snowdrifts. Vincent led me out onto the sprawling back deck of the cabin, handing me a thick, insulated parka that dwarfed my frame. Keep moving, he instructed, his eyes scanning the tree line with the habitual paranoia of a predator. The cold is only your enemy, if you let it catch you. I began to pace the length of the deck, my legs trembling slightly as they bore my weight for an extended period for the first time in nearly a week. The view was breathtaking. We were near the summit of the mountain. Below us, the world stretched out in an endless sea of green and white. I could see the faint, winding rivers, the dark patches of dense forest, and far, far in the distance, a faint plume of smoke that I knew belonged to the Silverwood territory. You can see everything from up here, I breathed, leaning against the heavy wooden railing. That's the point, Vincent said. He was standing near the edge of the deck, an axe resting casually on his broad shoulder. He wasn't wearing a jacket, completely unaffected by the sub-zero temperature. I turned to look at him. How do you survive up here alone? The winters are brutal. The prey is scarce. I have my ways. That's not an answer. I crossed my arms, feeling a strange surge of defiance. Maybe it was surviving the snow. Maybe it was the way Vincent looked at me as an equal. But the meek, submissive Omega I used to be felt like a distant memory. You're hiding up here. From what? Vincent's jaw tightened. He swung the axe down, burying the blade deep into a chopping block with a deafening thwack. He turned to me, his amber eyes unreadable. You ask too many questions for a refugee, and you dodge too many for a savior. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly followed by a slow, dangerous smirk. You have claws, little wolf. I like that. He walked toward me, his heavy boots silent on the snow-covered wood. He stopped beside me, looking out over the valley. For a long time, the only sound was the wind howling through the peaks. Have you ever heard the stories of the first packs? He asked quietly, his voice carrying over the wind. I frowned, digging into my memory. Nursery tales. The elders used to tell us stories about a time before the territories were divided, when all wolves answered to a single alpha king. They aren't just tales, Vincent said, his voice dropping an octave. There was a king, a bloodline blessed by the moon goddess herself, designed to keep the peace between the feral natures of our kind. They ruled from the high mountains, unbiased, uncorrupted by territorial greed. I looked at him, truly looking at the regal tilt of his chin, the commanding breadth of his shoulders, the sheer, undeniable power that radiated from him. My breath hitched in my throat. The Alpha King, I whispered. They say he was a myth, a monster, a giant wolf the color of midnight who vanished centuries ago. Not centuries, Vincent corrected softly. 10 years. I took a step back, my eyes widening. You? You're him? The king? Vincent let out a bitter, exhausted sigh. I was him. Or rather, I was supposed to be. My father was the king. When he died, the Alpha Councilmen like Marcus of Silverwood and the leaders of the Blood Moon and Riverclaw packs saw an opportunity. They didn't want to answer to a king anymore. They wanted total control of their own lands. They rebelled? I asked, horrified. They set a trap. Vincent's voice was devoid of emotion, a flat, chilling sound. Under the guise of a peace summit, they ambushed my family. My mother, my younger sister, they were slaughtered. I was 18. My wolf had just fully matured. I fought my way out, but there were too many. He pointed a scarred finger down at the valley. They hunted me for months, driven by fear that I would return to claim the throne. So, I climbed higher than they dared to follow. I let the cold erase my tracks. I let them believe I died in the wilderness. I stared at him, my heart aching. The pain I had felt from Julian's rejection suddenly felt so incredibly small compared to the magnitude of his loss. He wasn't a monster hiding in the dark. He was a king mourning a stolen kingdom. Why didn't you go back? I asked softly, stepping closer to him. When you got stronger? Why didn't you take back what was yours? Vincent turned his amber gaze down to me. The raw vulnerability in his eyes made my chest tighten. Because a king without a people is just a man with a target on his back. They don't want me, Quinn. They want their own power. If I go back, it means war. It means tearing our kind apart. I chose exile over civil war, so you just stay here. Forever. It was peaceful, he said, his gaze dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back up to my eyes. Until I found a half-frozen Omega in the snow who asked entirely too many questions. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I can leave, if I'm ruining your peace. Vincent reached out, his hand gripping the railing right next to mine. He was so close I could feel the heat rolling off his body, a stark, addictive contrast to the freezing wind. No, he said, his voice a low rumble. You aren't ruining it, Quinn. You're waking it up. Weeks turned into a month. The deep winter held the mountain in an icy grip, but inside the cabin, the frost was melting. I healed. The physical scars on my hands and feet faded into pale pink lines, but the internal healing was far more profound. Vincent trained me. He refused to let me fall back into the subservient habits of an Omega. When I tried to clean up after his meals, he stopped me. You are not a servant here. When I averted my eyes during a disagreement over firewood, he tilted my chin up. Look at me. An Omega's eyes belong on the horizon, not the dirt. He taught me how to fight. Not the aggressive, brutal brawling of the pack enforcers, but the fluid, strategic combat of a survivor. We spent hours in the snow behind the cabin. He showed me how to use my smaller size to my advantage, how to redirect the momentum of a larger opponent, how to strike for the joints and the throat. You're too tense, Vincent barked one afternoon, dodging a sloppy right hook I threw at his ribs. He caught my wrist, pulling me off balance, and twisted me around so my back was flush against his broad chest. His arm wrapped around my waist, pinning me in place. I gasped, my breath clouding in the freezing air. The sudden, intense physical contact sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. My inner wolf practically purred, leaning into his strength. You're anticipating the pain before the strike even lands, Vincent murmured, his mouth right by my ear. I could feel the rumble of his voice deep in my own chest. Julian conditioned you to expect a beating. You have to unlearn that. You are not prey, Quinn. It's hard, I breathed, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. I wasn't trying to escape his grip. I didn't want to. I know, he said softly. He slowly released my waist, his hands trailing down my arms until his fingers intertwined with mine. He stepped back, turning me to face him. His amber eyes were dark, burning with an emotion I was terrifyingly eager to name. He lifted his hand, his thumb brushing a snowflake from my bottom lip. The air between us cracked with a heavy magnetic tension. I found myself leaning in, my eyes fluttering shut, craving the heat of his mouth. The final confirmation of the bond my wolf had been screaming about for weeks. Awoo! The sound shattered the moment like a hammer hitting glass. It was a long, haunting howl echoing up from the lower ridges. Vincent went entirely rigid. The tenderness vanished from his face, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating mask of an apex predator. He pushed me behind him, his eyes scanning the tree line below. "What was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. I recognized the pitch of the howl. It wasn't a rogue, it was a pack call. "Scouts," Vincent growled, his jaw clenching. "Silverwood," panic spiked in my chest. "Julian? Is he looking for me?" Vincent turned to me, his expression grave. "Julian doesn't care enough to look for a rejected Omega. If Silverwood scouts are pushing this high into the dead zone, they aren't looking for you. Then what are they looking for?" "Rumors," Vincent said, turning toward the cabin. "Packs talk. The snows have been harsh. Prey is migrating higher. Hunters push their boundaries. Someone must have seen my tracks, or caught my scent on the wind. They're looking for the ghost." He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back door. "Get inside, now." Once inside, the cabin transformed from a sanctuary into a fortress. Vincent moved with terrifying speed, pulling heavy steel shutters over the massive windows, locking the reinforced oak doors, and pulling a heavy arsenal of weapons from a hidden compartment under the floorboards. "Vincent, what are you doing?" I asked, watching him load magazines with silver-tipped ammunition. "Preparing," he said bluntly. "Silverwood doesn't send one scout. They send hunting parties. If they find this cabin, they won't knock and ask for sugar." "We can run," I pleaded, grabbing his arm. "We can go higher, hide in the caves." He stopped, looking down at my hand on his arm, and then up into my eyes. "I spent 10 years running, Quinn. I gave up my crown, my home, and my family to avoid this. But I am done backing away from Marcus and his arrogant whelp of a son." He reached out, cupping my cheek. The heat of his palm was a stark contrast to the cold fear gripping my heart. "They threw you to the ice, and they stole my kingdom," Vincent whispered, his eyes glowing with an unholy, terrifying light. "Let them come. It's time they remembered why they fear the dark." The waiting was worse than the cold. For 2 days, we stayed locked inside the cabin. The fire was kept to a mere smolder to prevent smoke from giving away our exact position. The air grew stale, thick with anticipation, and the sharp tang of adrenaline. Vincent hardly slept. He sat by the darkened window, peering through a small slit in the steel shutters, a loaded rifle resting across his knees. I watched him, realizing that the man I had come to know, the quiet, brooding protector who brewed willow bark tea and taught me how to throw a punch, was fading. In his place, the Alpha King was emerging. His aura had expanded, filling the cabin with a heavy, suffocating pressure that commanded absolute submission. My inner wolf was a mess of conflicting instincts. She wanted to cower, but she also wanted to stand at his side, baring her teeth at the encroaching dark. "You shouldn't be here for this," Vincent said quietly on the second night, not looking away from the window. "When the sun comes up, I'm taking you to the hidden cellar. It's built into the bedrock. Even if they burn the cabin to the ground, you'll be safe." I sat up from the couch, throwing off the heavy furs. "No." He turned his head slowly, raising a scarred brow. "It wasn't a request, Quinn. I'm not hiding in a hole in the ground while you fight my old pack," I said, walking toward him. My legs were steady. My voice didn't shake. "I am tired of hiding. I hid in Silverwood by keeping my head down. I hid from the cold by trying to die. I'm not doing it anymore." Vincent stood up, towering over me in the dim light. "You don't understand what's coming. These aren't just bullies, Quinn. These are enforcers, killers. Julian will likely be leading them to prove his strength to his father." "I know exactly what Julian is," I shot back, the memory of his cold eyes during the rejection fueling the fire in my belly. "And I know what you are. You're the king, but you're just one wolf. You need someone watching your back." He let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "An Omega watching the king's back? I survived the Dead Peaks," I reminded him fiercely, poking a finger hard into his solid chest. "I survived Julian's rejection without losing my mind. You told me I wasn't broken. You told me I had claws. Were you lying? Vincent stared down at me, the tension humming between us like a live wire. The air felt dangerously thin. Suddenly, his hand shot out, wrapping around the back of my neck. He pulled me flush against him, his mouth crashing down onto mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, possessive, and violent. It tasted of fear, anger, and absolute claim. My hands flew up to grip his broad shoulders, my fingers digging into the heavy fabric of his shirt as I kissed him back with everything I had. The mating bond, the true bond, snapped into place with the force of a tectonic shift. It wasn't the weak, flickering string I had felt with Julian. This was a roaring inferno, a chain of unbreakable steel binding my soul to his. He pulled back, both of us panting, his forehead resting against mine. His amber eyes were blown wide, pupils swallowed by black. Mine. His inner wolf growled, the sound vibrating through his chest. Yours, I breathed back, the absolute truth of it settling deep into my bones. If you stand with me, Vincent whispered, his thumb stroking my jawline, there is no going back. You will be an enemy of the Packlands. You will be hunted. I'm already hunted, I smiled, a fierce, feral thing. But now, I'm hunting back. At that moment, the wind outside abruptly died. The eerie silence that followed was heavy and unnatural. Then, the sound of snapping branches echoed through the forest. Vincent's head snapped toward the door, his eyes flashing to brilliant, luminescent gold. They're here. The morning sun had barely crested the peaks when Vincent kicked the front doors of the cabin open. He didn't hide behind the reinforced walls. He didn't wait to be besieged. He stepped out onto the snow-covered porch, his broad chest rising and falling slowly. I stepped out right behind him, a heavy hunting knife gripped tightly in my hand. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were entirely steady. Standing in the clearing before the cabin were 20 wolves. They were all in their human forms, clad in heavy winter tactical gear, holding rifles and silver-laced nets. At the front of the pack, his breath pluming in the freezing air, stood Julian. He looked exactly the same. Tall, blonde, his face set in a permanent sneer of arrogant superiority. But as his eyes swept over the massive cabin and landed on the towering, terrifying figure of Vincent, I saw a flicker of genuine hesitation crack his facade. Then, his gaze slid past Vincent and landed on me. Julian's jaw dropped. The shock was so profound he actually took a half-step backward. "Quinn?" he breathed, his voice carrying over the silent snow. You're alive?" "Surprise, Julian," I called out, my voice clear and ringing. "Turns out I'm harder to kill than you thought." Julian's shock quickly morphed into dark, furious confusion. He looked from me to Vincent, his eyes narrowing. "So, this is the rogue who's been leaving tracks on our borders, scavenging our leftovers, taking my discarded trash." A low, vibrating growl ripped from Vincent's throat. The sound was so deep, so purely primal, that several of the enforcers behind Julian flinched, instinctively gripping their weapons tighter. "You are trespassing on sovereign ground, pup," Vincent said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Take your men, turn around, and I will let you live." Julian barked a laugh, though it sounded thin and forced. "Sovereign ground? This is Silverwood territory. I am the future Alpha, and you are a dead man." He raised his hand, signaling the enforcers. "Kill the rogue. Bring the Omega to me. I'll execute her myself for consorting with the enemy." The enforcers raised their rifles. Vincent didn't draw a weapon. He didn't even flinch. He simply stepped off the porch and into the snow. And then, he shifted. It wasn't the painful, bone-cracking transformation of a normal wolf. It was a fluid, explosive explosion of shadow and muscle. In the blink of an eye, the man was gone, replaced by a nightmare. Vincent in his wolf form was colossal. He stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, a massive, hulking beast covered in fur as black as a starless night. His eyes burned like twin suns in the shadow of his heavy brow. The sheer, overwhelming pressure of his alpha aura exploded outward, a physical shockwave of dominance that hit the clearing like a bomb. The Silverwood enforcers cried out. Several dropped their rifles, falling to their knees as their inner wolves submitted instantly, paralyzed by an ancient, instinctual terror. Julian stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. He shifted, transforming into a large, timber-gray wolf. He bared his teeth, trying to project alpha authority. But compared to Vincent, he looked like a frightened pup. Vincent didn't howl. He didn't posture. He simply charged. The snow erupted around him. A silver-tipped bullet grazed his shoulder, but he didn't even break stride. He hit the front line of enforcers like a freight train. He didn't kill them, he simply swatted them aside with brutal, bone-shattering force, sending grown men flying into the snowbanks. Julian lunged, snapping his jaws toward Vincent's throat. Vincent caught him in midair. The black wolf's massive jaws clamped down, not on Julian's throat, but on the scruff of his neck. Vincent slammed Julian to the ground with world-shaking force, pinning the future alpha of Silverwood into the frozen earth. Julian whimpered, a pathetic, high-pitched sound of total defeat, his tail tucked firmly between his legs. The remaining enforcers, seeing their leader broken so easily, threw themselves to the ground, pressing their throats into the snow in absolute submission. The fight was over in less than 60 seconds. Vincent stood over Julian, his chest heaving, his amber eyes burning with fury. He slowly shifted back into his human form, standing naked and terrifying in the freezing cold. He looked down at the trembling, pathetic form of his enemy. "Tell your father," Vincent commanded, his voice echoing off the mountain peaks, "that the king has returned from the dead, and he is coming for his crown." The aftermath was a deafening silence. Julian, humiliated and bruised, shifted back to his human form. He didn't dare look at Vincent. He kept his eyes locked on the blood-stained snow as he scrambled to his feet, clutching his torn clothes. "Go," Vincent barked, the single word dripping with absolute authority. The Silverwood enforcers didn't need to be told twice. They dragged their injured comrades to their feet and retreated down the mountain, their tails metaphorically and literally tucked between their legs. Julian was the last to leave. He paused at the edge of the tree line, finally raising his eyes. But he didn't look at Vincent. He looked at me. I was standing on the porch, the hunting knife still in my hand. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't afraid. I looked at the man who had broken my heart, who had sentenced me to a freezing death, and I felt absolutely nothing but pity. He was small, weak, and pathetic. "You," Julian choked out, his voice trembling. "What are you?" "I am his queen," I said softly, but the words carried clearly. Julian flinched as if struck. He turned and vanished into the shadows of the pines. Vincent walked slowly back up the steps of the porch. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a heavy exhaustion in its wake. He stopped in front of me, his chest rising and falling. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the knife and threw my arms around his neck, burying my face in his chest. He wrapped his massive arms around my waist, lifting me off the ground and burying his face in my neck, inhaling my scent deeply. "It's starting," he murmured against my skin. "Marcus will not let this go. When Julian tells him who I am, he will rally the other packs. There will be war. Let them come." I pulled back, looking up into his glowing amber eyes. "They have grown fat and lazy in their stolen castles. You are the king of the winter. You survived the ice, and so did I." Vincent smiled, a genuine, heartbreakingly beautiful smile that reached his eyes. "We need to leave the cabin," he said. "We need to go to the old ruins, to the seat of the first king. If I am going to challenge the alphas, I must do it on the ancient grounds." "Then we go," I said, taking his hand. The journey took 2 days of brutal hiking across the highest, most treacherous peaks of the mountain range, but the cold didn't bother me anymore. The bond I shared with Vincent radiated a constant, thrumming heat that kept the frostbite at bay. I was no longer an Omega, bound by the arbitrary laws of a corrupt pack. I was the mate of the true king, awakened and empowered by the very elements that had tried to destroy me. We arrived at the ruins at twilight. It was a massive, circular amphitheater carved directly into the black stone of the mountain, surrounded by towering obelisks inscribed with the ancient runes of our kind. In the center sat a heavy, unadorned stone throne. As Vincent stepped into the center of the arena, the air seemed to hum with latent energy. The mountain remembered its master. He didn't sit on the throne. He stood before it, turning to face me. "The coming months will be blood and fire, Quinn," he said, taking both of my hands in his. I will have to rip the packs from the hands of tyrants. It will not be safe. I have never been safe, I replied, squeezing his hands tightly. I was an Omega. I was prey. I would rather stand in the fire with you than freeze in the dark alone. Vincent dropped to one knee. The sight of the massive, terrifying Alpha King kneeling in the snow before me made my breath catch in my throat. I have no crown to give you, he said, looking up at me with absolute adoration. I have no kingdom, yet. Only an army of ghosts and a mountain of snow. But I pledge my life, my wolf, and my soul to you, Quinn. Not as my Omega, but as my equal. My mate. My queen. Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. I pulled him up, crashing my lips against his. The bond flared, solidifying into something eternal and unbreakable. As we kissed, the wind howled through the ancient stones, but it didn't sound mocking anymore. It sounded like a pack. Millions of voices, echoing through time, howling in triumph for the return of the king and the rise of the Omega who conquered the snow. The packs below did not know it yet, but the winter they had ignored was coming for them, and it was bringing the storm. News travels on the wind. It whispers through the pines, echoes off the frozen ravines, and seeps into the lowest, darkest corners of the territories where the forgotten reside. Julian's humiliated return to Silverwood was meant to be a secret, a hushed disgrace locked behind the Alpha's walls. But a beaten wolf reeks of fear, and the scent of a terrified alpha pup was too potent to conceal. Within days of our arrival at the seat of the first king, the silence of the dead peaks began to break. The first to arrive was a family of 4. They emerged from the heavy snowfall at the edge of the amphitheater, practically starving, their clothes in rags. The father, a wolf missing half his left ear and sporting a severe limp, stepped forward and immediately dropped to his knees in the snow, baring his neck in absolute submission to Vincent. We are of Blood Moon, the man rasped, his voice weak with exhaustion. Cast out for challenging the Alpha's tithes. We heard. The rumors. The Black Wolf. The true bloodline. We came to serve. Vincent stood atop the dais of the ancient stone throne. He didn't project dominance to force them down. He merely existed, his regal presence washing over them like a heavy, warm tide. Rise, Vincent commanded gently. There are no outcasts here, only the pack. I stepped down the stone stairs, carrying thick woolen blankets and a pot of hot stew we had prepared over the campfire. As I wrapped a blanket around the shivering mother, she looked at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. She recognized the scent of an Omega, but she saw the way the true king watched me with total devotion and absolute respect. You are the Omega from Silverwood, she whispered, her hands trembling as she took the bowl of stew. The one who survived. My name is Quinn. I smiled softly, brushing the snow from her young son's hair. And you survived too. Eat. You are safe now. They were only the first. Over the next 2 weeks, the mountain, once considered a dead zone, became a sanctuary. They came in ones and twos, sometimes in small, ragged groups. They were the rejected, the injured, the elders deemed too weak to hunt, the Omegas tired of being treated like dirt. They were the ghosts of the packs, the people Marcus and his fellow Alphas had thrown away. Our numbers swelled to over 200. The ancient ruins transformed into a bustling, breathing encampment. Fires burned brightly within the stone ring, casting back the harsh winter night. Tents were erected, hunting parties were organized, and for the first time in a decade, the high mountain echoed with the sounds of laughter, arguments, and life. Vincent was a natural leader. He didn't rule with an iron fist or the threat of violence like the modern Alphas. He ruled through profound respect. He listened to the elders, hunted alongside the warriors, and personally helped fortify the camp. But as the days ticked by, the shadow of war grew darker. Marcus has formed a coalition, Vincent announced one evening, unrolling a crude map of the territories on a flat stone. Around him stood our newly formed council, a mix of seasoned rogues, bitter ex-enforcers, and myself. Silverwood, Blood Moon, and Riverclaw. 3 packs, uniting under one banner. They are marching over 1,000 combat-ready wolves toward the mountain. A murmur of anxiety rippled through the gathered crowd. We had 200 wolves. Most of them were malnourished, injured, or completely untrained in combat. 1,000 prime warriors was an execution squad. We have the high ground, argued Silas, a heavily scarred rogue who had taken on the role of Vincent's second-in-command. They have to climb the pass to reach the ruins. It's a natural bottleneck. We can rain hell down on them. They will just besiege us, Vincent countered, his brow furrowed in deep thought. They know we can't sustain these numbers up here indefinitely. They will block the passes and starve us out. I looked around the faces of our people in the flickering firelight. I saw fear, but beneath it, I saw a desperate, burning desire to fight. They were tired of running. I was tired of running. Then we don't let them besiege us. I spoke up. My voice wasn't as loud as Vincent's or Silas's, but the moment I opened my mouth, the entire circle fell silent. The respect they afforded their king, they extended equally to me. Vincent looked at me, his amber eyes glowing with pride. What are you suggesting, Quinn? I am suggesting we use what they despise against them, I said. Stepping up to the map, I pointed to the jagged, treacherous ridges that flanked the main pass leading to our encampment. Marcus and his alphas only respect brute strength. They train their enforcers to fight in open fields, to rely on overwhelming power and size. They think Omegas and outcasts are useless because we can't win a wrestling match. I looked up, meeting the eyes of the gathered crowd. But we know how to survive. We know how to hide, how to track, how to move silently. We know these woods better than they do, because we've had to hide in them our entire lives. I turned back to Vincent. We don't meet them in the bottleneck. We let them think they are marching to a siege. We use the Omegas, the smaller wolves, the fast ones. We trigger avalanches. We set traps in the snowdrifts. We bleed them every step of the way up the mountain. By the time they reach this amphitheater, they won't be an army. They'll be exhausted, terrified prey. A profound silence held the night. Then, slowly, a wide, predatory grin spread across Vincent's face. It was the smile of the true king recognizing the brilliance of his queen. You heard her, Vincent rumbled, turning to Silas and the others. We don't fight their war. We make them fight ours. Prepare the traps. Gather the fastest runners. The king's army is going hunting. The roar that erupted from the crowd shook the snow from the ancient pines. We were ghosts no longer. We were the storm, and the corrupt packs were walking right into our teeth. The sky, the morning of the battle, was a bruising, heavy purple. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, cracking like glass in our lungs. But the chill went unnoticed. The adrenaline pumping through the veins of our ragged army was a wildfire. From my vantage point high on the stone walls of the amphitheater, I could see them coming. The combined army of the three packs looked like a dark, creeping stain against the pristine white of the lower valleys. 1,000 wolves, marching in rigid, disciplined formations. At their head walked Marcus, the alpha of Silverwood. Even from a distance, I could recognize his massive, lumbering frame. He wore thick furs and carried a massive, double-bladed battle axe. A ridiculous, archaic weapon meant entirely for intimidation. Beside him, noticeably hanging back, was Julian. As they reached the base of the mountain pass, a steep, winding trail flanked by towering cliffs of ice and stone, Marcus raised his hand. The massive army halted. He tilted his head back, his voice amplified by his alpha power, booming up the mountain. "Vincent!" Marcus bellowed, the sound echoing like thunder. "The dead should stay in their graves. Surrender the Omega and submit to the council, and we will grant you a swift, merciful end. Resist, and we will slaughter every stray and cur you have gathered." Vincent stood at the very edge of the ruins, a solitary figure against the gray sky. He didn't shout back. He simply raised his hand and dropped it. That was the signal. High above the marching army, hidden entirely from view, our fast wolves, the Omegas, and the agile rogues went to work. The traps I had helped design were sprung. With a deafening crack that sounded like the mountain breaking in half, the snow-laden ridges on either side of the pass gave way. Massive, controlled avalanches roared down the cliffs, carrying tons of snow, ice, and jagged rocks directly into the flanks of the Alpha Coalition. Screams and panicked howls erupted from the valley. The disciplined formations shattered instantly. Dozens of enforcers were swept away, buried under the white onslaught. The sheer arrogance of Marcus had blinded him. He had marched his army into a fatal choke point, without sending scouts to clear the high ground. "Push through!" Marcus roared, shifting furiously into a massive, grizzled brown wolf. "Get to the ruins! Kill them all!" The surviving enforcers surged forward, scrambling frantically up the steep, treacherous path. But their nightmare had only just begun. Hidden pits covered in thin branches and snow collapsed under their heavy boots. Snares rigged to ancient pines whipped out, hoisting full-grown warriors into the air. Volleys of silver-tipped arrows, fired by Silas and our best archers, rained down from the cliffs, striking with deadly precision. By the time the vanguard of Marcus's army finally breached the edge of the amphitheater, they were panting, bleeding, and terrified. They had expected to crush a handful of starving outcasts. Instead, they had walked into a meat grinder, but there were still hundreds of them. As they poured into the ancient stone circle, shifting into their massive wolf forms, the true battle began. Vincent did not wait for them. With a primal, earth-shaking roar, he shifted into his colossal black wolf form and launched himself from the dais. He hit the front line like a meteor. Bodies flew through the air as his massive jaws snapped bone and tore through muscle. He was not just fighting, he was executing a flawless, brutal dance of death. He was the wrath of the first king unleashed. The clash of bodies and the scent of iron filled the air. Our forces, despite being outnumbered, fought with the ferocity of those who had absolutely nothing left to lose. I didn't stay on the wall. I drew the twin hunting knives Vincent had given me and dropped into the fray. A Blood Moon enforcer lunged at me, his jaws snapping for my throat. I didn't freeze. I remembered Vincent's training. I slid under his heavy leap, slicing my blade deep into the tender muscle of his hind leg. As he collapsed with a yelp, I rolled to my feet, already moving to the next target. "Quinn!" The snarl cut through the chaos of battle. I spun around, my blood running cold. Julien. He was in his human form, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He held a jagged silver blade in his hand. He looked frantic, wildly out of his depth amid the brutal, life-or-death melee occurring around us. "You did this," Julien hissed, stepping over the body of a fallen comrade to reach me. "You brought this ruin on my pack. You pathetic, useless." He lunged, swinging the silver blade wildly at my chest. Months ago, I would have cowered. I would have taken the blow, believing I deserved it. But the Omega who died in the snow was gone. I sidestepped the sloppy, enraged strike with ease. As his momentum carried him forward, I slammed the heavy pommel of my knife directly into his temple. The impact was sickeningly loud. Julien crumpled to the snow, the silver blade flying from his grasp. He tried to push himself up, dazed and bleeding, but I kicked him hard in the ribs, sending him sprawling onto his back. I stepped over him, pressing the tip of my blade directly against the frantic, pulsing vein in his throat. Julien stared up at me, his arrogant eyes finally wide with genuine terror. He was waiting for the killing blow. I looked down at the man who had ordered me to die. He was so small, so utterly insignificant. "I am not the stain on your bloodline, Julien," I said, my voice eerily calm amidst the roaring battle. "You are." I pulled the blade away, turned my back on him, and walked away. Killing him wouldn't prove my strength. Letting him live with the knowledge that an Omega had bested and spared him was a far worse punishment. He was broken. Suddenly, a massive shockwave of pure alpha power brought the entire battlefield to a standstill. Wolves from both sides froze, instinctively lowering their heads. In the center of the amphitheater, the Battle of the Kings was concluding. Vincent, in his human form, stood over the battered, bloody form of Alpha Marcus. Marcus was on his knees, his chest heaving, his face a ruin of cuts and bruises. Vincent held Marcus's own massive battle axe in his hands. "You are a relic, Marcus," Vincent's voice boomed, carrying across the silent, blood-stained snow. "You stole a throne to build a prison. Look around you." Vincent swept a hand toward the exhausted, terrified enforcers of the coalition, and then to the proud, fiercely standing army of outcasts and rogues. "Your people fight out of fear of your whip. Mine fight for their freedom. You have already lost." Marcus spat a wad of bloody phlegm onto the snow. "You are no king. You are a ghost." Vincent's amber eyes flared with terrifying intensity. With a swift, fluid motion, he brought the heavy handle of the battle axe down, striking Marcus brutally across the jaw. The corrupt alpha collapsed into the snow, unconscious. Vincent dropped the axe. He didn't execute him. He didn't need to. The total, humiliating defeat in front of 3 packs was absolute. Vincent turned slowly, his glowing eyes sweeping over the hundreds of enemy enforcers surrounding him. The silence was absolute, broken only by the howling of the mountain wind. "The first king has returned," Vincent declared, the command in his voice absolute, echoing off the ancient stone pillars. Submit, or share his fate. For a long, agonizing second, nobody moved. Then, a single Silverwood enforcer near the front dropped his weapons and fell to his knees, baring his neck to the black wolf. Then another, and another, like dominoes falling in the snow. The massive army of the coalition collapsed to their knees. The Blood Moon wolves, the Riverclaw warriors, and finally, the broken, trembling Julian. They all bowed their heads, their inner wolves recognizing the true, ancient authority they had been missing for a decade. Vincent didn't look at them. He walked through the sea of kneeling warriors, his eyes locked entirely on me. He reached me, his chest heaving, his face covered in soot and blood, looking more beautiful and terrifying than anything I had ever seen. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out, his bloody hand taking mine, and lifted it high into the air for the entire mountain to see. A deafening, earth-shattering howl erupted from the throats of our ghost army, soon joined by the submitted enforcers. It was a chorus of victory, a song of a new era. The winter had finally broken. True strength is not measured by how loudly you can roar, or how easily you can discard those you deem weak. True strength is found in the resilience of the broken, the fire that burns in the coldest nights, and the courage to stand by those who choose to fight for what is right, rather than what is easy. Quinn was rejected for being weak, but it was in the unforgiving snow that she found her true power, and in the arms of an exiled king, she found her destiny. If you felt the chill of the snow and the heat of the Alpha King's return, please drop a like, share this story with your fellow pack members, and subscribe for more epic, cinematic tales of romance, betrayal, and redemption.